Hi, this is Bravo21. I'm a glider pilot and a sim developer. This video is about using ballast. Why do we put water ballast into the wings of gliders, and also using the flaps? I did think on the video I did last time, diving straight into whatever it was we talked about. Oh, the mechanics of getting a glider into the air in flight sim is maybe people looking for how to glide in Microsoft Flight Simulator might be interested in just how do we basically do it? How do we find the lift? You know, just the actual flying part of it. We go around, we're looking for lift, we're looking for thermals. We're trying to fly at the right speed. If you want a video more on that kind of stuff, which is probably a little bit more interesting than some of the technical side of it, just let me know in the comments. Or anything else. Anyway, flaps and ballast. So first of all, talk about the ballast. That is water in the wings. There's, in all these gliders, there's a ballast valve somewhere where you can, this is the ballast valve closed at the moment. If I kind of drag it back here, it will open, first of all, the valves in the outer wing tips, and then it's going to open the valves in the inner wings and the tail. Okay, so, and you can configure a button on your joystick because you need to dump the ballast before you land, and it makes the glider a lot heavier. You could get something like a 300 kilogram glider, and you can put 200 kilograms of water in it, so it's a lot heavier. So the question is, why would we do it? I will come on to that. The other thing is the flaps, just to be clear. So we have a flap lever in the glider here. Flaps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, landing. And I will come back to it. But typically, because this is a sim, it's a little bit awkward to look down at a lever sometimes. You definitely will be configuring buttons on your stick to flap up, flap down. We do it all the time in a glider. And typically we'll put a gauge on the panel showing a flap indicator, because just within the sim you tend to have less mobility of looking around to see those things. I'll just show you it from the outside. That's the flaps in roughly neutral, which is about flap 3 on this glider. And we can go into negative flap. If you can see on the trailing edge of the wings, if you just watch those, I've gone into negative flap, I'll come down into positive flap. It's actually the full length of the wing. It's not modeled quite right here. It would look continuous, but the whole length of the wing is both flaps, and it moves. You'll see it moves with the ailerons. These things don't have to move much to move the plane. Anyway, so there's flaps going up and down on the trailing edge of that wing. And what it's actually doing is giving us a set of different wing profiles. Flaps in gliders are really quite different than flaps in, say, a jumbo jet. And on a jumbo jet, they're just these massive barn doors which get lowered into the airstream, and they create a huge amount of drag. And they actually, because they're sloping downwards and they're massive, they create a lot of lift as well. But the engines, and the plane would probably come to a dead stop, except the engines are so powerful that the engines on a jumbo jet are continually pulling the plane forward. So you just got kind of a huge amount of lift, which is useful for takeoff and landing. In gliders, it's different. The challenge for us is Microsoft really models the jumbo jet style flaps. They don't really understand what glider flaps do. And glider flaps are really modifying the entire wing profile. All glider flaps have what you'd consider kind of a neutral position, which is kind of the center point of the flap. Anyway, back into the plane. So let's just talk about ballast. We're going to get onto some graphs. Oh, and how do you get the ballast in? Is typically when you spawn the plane. I flew out of Bilbao, by the way. We're in Spain. We're in Spain at the moment. And to keep things simple, I've turned the lift in 2024. You can turn the lift and turbulence off. So I've kind of done that. Keep it simple. So this netto should be generally reading around 0 most of the time. So with most gliders, you can just spawn them into the sim, and they've already got the ballast in there. The LS4, there's a request ballast switch on the panel, and a little ballast indicator that says your ballast just went from 0% to 100%. My advice is do not go into the EFB. I mean, it's a big mistake for Microsoft. They've moved pretty much most of the UI from the front of the sim into this massive EFB web app, which is 99% web app, 1% functionality, and the functionality part of it has got a lot of bugs in it. So there is a legacy weight and balance menu. This is what we had in 2020. from Gottfriends. It's freeware. And you basically get back the controls you had in 2020, which is, these are the ballast tanks. Here's the tail tank. I can fill it up. I can empty it while I'm flying. And the reason there's a tail tank, by the way, is the water ballast in the wings is sensibly put forward of the center line, forward of the center of mass, so that when you fill up with water, it tends to make the glider nose heavy. You know, making any aeroplane tail heavy is extremely risky. You know, you're risking the plane not flying right and flopping out of the air, stalling. So if you're doing anything edgy, like making the plane weigh twice as much as it usually does, you tend to want to have that in the front half of the plane, not the back half of the plane. And because gliders are designed to be such high performance, I'm going to try not to crash in this in this video. Gliders are such high performance that the exact pitch of the plane, you're trying to get it exactly right to minimize the drag on the plane, and that's why there's a tail tank. If you can look at the center of mass little button here, it's moving forwards and backwards. As I empty the tail tank, it moves forward. Okay, and it's part of the spec that when you fill the ballast tanks up, you need to have some water in the tail tank. But as you dump it, you can get rid of it and then be lighter overall. Anyway, so traditional legacy weight and balance from Gottfriends. I'm pretty sure it's flightsim.to is where you can download this from, but it's definitely freeware. And I recommend it because that means you don't have to go into the EFB. And when you go to the EFB, it causes a whole load of other problems for gliding specifically. Okay, so that's the ballast story. Let's talk about what does the ballast actually do. And the key point to understand, here's graph number 1, is this blue line is what happens. The faster you fly, the faster you come down. Okay, I'm going to slew up. I know this is a bit naff. Hit the Y key, slew up. I'm going to run out of height otherwise. I've turned the lift off in the sim. Okay, we're back in business. And I will try and get my graph back. Sorry about that. Yeah, so the faster you fly, the faster you come. This is because I wanted to do this, right? Okay, you can see this red needle is saying what I'm coming down at 2 knots roughly, and I'm flying at 90 or 100. This is all very rough. I speed up, you're going to see me coming down faster. Speed up. Coming down faster, so now I'm doing 140 knots. I'm up here somewhere. Over speed. Okay, see the needles down here? And that's because I've moved along this curve. So we're going to be on this curve somewhere, given whatever speed we're flying at, we're going to be coming down at that amount of sink. So if I fly slowly, I'm using the flap, so I will come back to that. Unsurprisingly, we come down less. Okay, so that is this curve. If I fly too slowly, we fall off the back of this curve, and because of the angle of attack, it kind of makes sense, obviously, if you look at it from the outside, because of the angle of attack, the plane just starts shedding lift, and we drop out of the sky, have to recover. Okay, so that's the curve to understand. That is called the polar curve. And there's relatively few people think about planes in the context of this. For gliders, it's pretty much everything. Okay, so an interesting thing from the polar curve you can get is, well, that's interesting. What's the minimum we could sink at? Because by definition on this polar curve, you go too slow, you're stalling, and therefore definitely falling out of the air. If you go too fast, you're coming down faster. Well, there must be in the middle somewhere where you're coming down at the minimum rate. And typically that would be quite slow. So let's say I'm here doing 50-something knots. I am full of ballast, okay? That's going to affect these things. I will come back to that. And we would be sinking at about 0.9 of a knot, which would be a glide ratio of 50 to 1 or so, something like that in this plane. We are ballasted. I'll come back to that. Okay. You could ask the question, why don't we just fly around all the time at 46 knots? And the answer is, well, you would stay in still air. You would stay in the air the longest if you flew at 46 knots and you're tiptoeing around. But that isn't going to work in a competition. In a competition, you're trying to get around a task as fast as you can. And if you float around at 46 knots and everybody else is flying at 90 knots and then climbing and then 90 knots and then climbing, they are going to beat you. Okay, but the fact is, there is a speed at which you sink the least, and that's called the minimum sink speed. Clues in the name. Just get aware of what this curve actually means. Okay, so that's the point. Whatever speed you're flying at, you're on this curve somewhere. So if I fly at 100 knots, maybe I'm coming down at something like 3 knots. Okay, the slide before, I'm flying at 46 knots, I'm coming up at 0.9, 100 knots, I'm coming down at 3. That will give us, I'll talk about this concept, a 33 to 1 glide slope. Okay, if I'm flying at 100, coming down at 3, that's a slope of about 33 to 1. And if I fly slower, typically, up to a point, my glide slope will improve. And if I fly faster, that glide slope will get steeper. So we do talk about the glide slope and best glide. A glide is the best glider. This glider is exceptional. It's something like 56 to 1. We talk about those a lot. But all it is what's the slope of that line? Going to, you're flying at the speed, you're sinking at that speed, therefore your glide ratio is that you're coming down this glide slope here. And that's a glide slope of 33 to 1. Okay. All right. Flight 50, come down at 1. That's a 50 to 1 glide ratio. So what happens when you add ballast? This is getting to the crux of it. It moves this whole curve down. You're heavier. You're going to be sinking more. That means it comes down, but also to the right. Okay. So you penetrate the air more effectively. You're coming down faster, but you can fly faster. And here's the crazy thing. Okay, so let's say the plane weighing 400 kilograms. This is the plane weighing 500 kilograms. You've got a pretty much similar curve, but it's been shifted down and to the right by a very defined ratio using aerodynamic formulas. Okay, now here is the incredible thing. When you make the plane heavier, this could be a paper airplane, right? You've clipped paper clips onto it. If you make it heavier, it sinks faster, but you can fly faster. The glide ratio stays exactly the same. So if you took your paper airplane in your living room and you threw it towards the far end of the room, it would come down at a certain glide slope. If you made it heavier, clip some paper clips onto it, and throw it a second time, sure, it will be flying faster and it will be coming down faster, but it can fly along the exact same slope, right? You can get the exact same slope. So as you add ballast, this curve is going down and to the right, but it's sliding along the same glide slope that the lighter glider had. So this is the gift that just keeps on giving with gliding, right? You can just make the glider heavier and kind of everything happens faster, but you've got the same glide ratio at best. And it also has, which makes gliding is hugely successful for gliding to be able to do this. So it sort of really pays in any kind of decent conditions to make the glider heavier if you can. So gliders have been made stronger and stronger. You know, these days they're made out of carbon fiber and Kevlar. But what you can see is at some point, that is true when you want to fly fast. So you can see these curves cross over. At some point, the penalty of carrying the extra weight makes it worse, slower than that point, to have that ballast on board. So if you find you're needing to fly slowly a lot of the time, like you're tiptoeing along, then you need to dump the ballast. Okay, so you can press your button or do this. We tend not to do that in the sim because we set great gliding days in the sim. Okay, I didn't plan this through. I've got to find this graph again. Okay, so this is the gift that keeps on giving. As you can make the glider heavier, everything happens faster, but there is a crossover point to make it worthwhile. And so what you might do is dump half the ballast or dump all the ballast. But typically in a competition, if you do dump the ballast, kind of means you're in trouble at that point. There are bound to be other competitors that didn't need to, and you are going to feel like your tail is tied to a tree when they just stroll away from you, because they can just glide for the same glide ratio. They can just glide a lot faster. Okay, so that's what ballast does. You can fly faster and heavier, but there's a penalty when you're slow, and when you're slow, that would be in the climb. But net, it massively pays off. Flaps are doing, in principle, the exact same thing. When you put positive flaps down, in gliding cases, you're changing the curvature of the wing. It's giving you better performance at low speed, but with a compromise at high speed. All right, because it's understandable, isn't it? You've lowered a flap into the airstream. So that's what the left-hand end of this curve is. But in effect, with gliding flaps, you might have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 flaps, and in effect, you've got 7 or 8 wing profiles, all in the same glider. You can choose by changing which flap you're in, which I remind you is this gauge in the bottom left-hand corner, Do you want to be a low speed, high, good climbing glider, or do you want to be a high speed, good fast gliding glider? And you're effectively choosing the wing profile for that. But you can see this effect on the Polar is pretty much the same as carrying ballast, and obviously this plane has both flaps and ballast. And just to get an idea of the speeds involved, is for every one of these flap settings, there's a speed above which it's a good flap, and below which it's not such a good flap. You should be in a lower flap, or you should be in a higher flap, as you're choosing. So if I take this example of the fastest flap, this is the most negative flap, this is the most positive flap. It doesn't mean it's necessarily negative. It can be 0, plus, 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 or it can be, in most gliders, it's plus, plus, 0, minus, minus. You know, gliders can have a negative flap, but it has the same effect as a less positive flap. Okay, so this crossover point for the fastest flap tends to be around 90 knots. So just keep it varies by plane, but the idea is if you want to fly along, as I will do now, at 90 knots in Spain, what are we doing? 80, 90. I can get rid of this now. Whoop. Here we go. See, I'm flying at 90 knots. And I've gone into the most negative flap. 1 is the most negative flap. You don't really need to know, is that minus 6 degrees, that's minus 3 degrees, that's 0, that's plus 5 degrees, that's plus 10 degrees. It doesn't matter what the numbers are. You just need to know the speeds. And generally, if you just want a simple rule of thumb, it will vary a bit by plane, and sometimes can be a bit faster. But once you're up in 90 to 100 knots, which I am now, just get into the most negative flap and stay there. We tend to be up in the speed range a lot. But as you fly around and slow down, and let's say the wind was coming from our left, I'm going to be tonking along. We could be going faster than this. I have turned the lift off in the sim just for now, so this isn't going to work. But let's say I'm going fast. I know there's wind coming from our left. I'm coming up to this hill, and I'm going to want to climb when I get here because I know the wind is whooshing up this hill from my left, going uphill like this. So I pull up, pull up, pull up. You'll see my speed start to come 90, between 90 and 80. I'm going into flap 2. Between 80 and 70, I'm going into flap 3. And now, before I die, because there is no lift here, I'm just going to turn away and get out of it. I'm going to flap 4 because I'm at 60, which I wasn't entirely planning on. I'm just trying to avoid dying. Okay, and generally, if you just use this as a guide, you will do fine. You don't need to be more accurate than this. You have a landing flap, which is kind of all bets are off. That is a big positive flap deflection. It will reduce your stall speed. It will add additional drag. It's not the most efficient flap to fly in at all. But actually, when you're trying to land this thing, it's advantageous to be inefficient and have a lower stall speed when you're trying to land. So the landing flap is a big old flap. It comes down quite a lot. The next two flap positions are typically for thermaling because it's more about improving your control at low speed and improving your lift at low speed because you're going to be turning in circles. You might be full of ballast like now, and I'll be turning at 60 knots. If you're banked over at 45 degrees, you've increased the weight of the glider because obviously you're pulling G. I'm banked over now. I'm sort of turning. And it's about 40%. The plane is about 40% heavier because of the G you're pulling at 45 degrees. I'm not at 45 degrees now. I'm at 30 maybe or something. And that is going to increase your risk of stalling. It's like adding ballast, basically. Okay, so think of the landing is just landing. Forget that one, but just use it for landing. The next two are for thermaling. And by the way, you can land a plane. You don't have to be in the landing flap if you know it's a bit windy, you're coming in faster and stuff like that. You can be in just one of these more positive flap settings and land the plane. One of them in the middle somewhere will be best glide. You're probably in a ballastic glider. Hit that at about 70 knots. And then the ones above it, think of them as higher speed cruising flaps. And these numbers in terms of once you're above 90, 95, 100, depends on the plane, you're going to get into max negative and cruise like a champ. Okay, so I hope that helped. If there's more basic gliding information you want, just let me know in the comments. Cheers.